Hi, everybody. We are joined today by Jason Bradford, the president of the board of directors for the Post-Carbon Institute. Jason is also a co-host of Crazy Town podcast, an excellent podcast, I must say. Jason, welcome, and thank you for taking time to speak with us today.
It's really good to see you and talk to you, Seb.
So I know the Post-Carbon Institute from my work in the environmental community over years, but before I got to Corvallis, and was happy to learn that, in fact, Corvallis is the home base for the Institute. And can you talk a little bit about what Post-Carbon Institute is all about and your mission a little bit?
Sure. In short, it's not like a lot of other nonprofits in the area because we're a think tank. Okay, you often think of think tanks as like based in Washington D.C. or something like that, or at a major university or whatever. But no, we're a small think tank and been active since mid 2000s. Have a big fellows network. So if you go to postcarbon.org and kind of look at staff and board and fellows, you'll see that we have people all over the world involved. And so what we do is we analyze sort of information related to energy and the economy and society, and we frame it to kind of help steer thought processes, ideas, and conversations. Really to consider the future, and why it's called post-carbon is the idea that at some point, we have less and less fossil hydrocarbons to burn. And those are really, that's the motive force. That's what powers our economy right now and has led to the civilization we're accustomed to. And so really we highlight the fact that whether you do it for policy reasons that you don't want to burn them anymore because they're too polluting, or because these were laid down by dead algae, tens of millions of years ago, and there's only so many left, and we're going to the most extreme locations on the planet to find them now, that's a good sign that they don't last forever. So we're trying to grapple with the implications of that and help other people think through that as well.
So is it like you're predicting there's going to be a point where there's going to be an end to oil, or the end to oil as we all know it, and the world needs to prepare for that, and you're helping share ideas and background and research and science to help that process? Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, to some extent. I would say, oil obviously gets a lot of attention because it is the most important energy source that the world uses right now, both by volume, like the actual amount of work done by oil is larger than any other source, but also its unique properties because it allows for transportation, long distance, heavy equipment use, a feedstock for many industrial products. So oil is sort of the prime most important energy source of society. But really what we do is we think about not just the eventual limits to oil supplies, but for really, you could think of society as this giant organism that's just eating more and more, consuming more and more of the earth. Dr. Seuss the Lorax kind of had it right. You build all these machines and you start cutting down the truffula trees to make stuff and sweaters, I think. Is that what it was?
Something like a sweater.
Yeah, sort of a sweater. Right. But eventually, that runs its course, and you can never say with any precision this is the date that this will happen. But it's not hard to look at the long arc, the trajectory, and think in terms of of years and decades, and to see where things might be. So that's sort of the perspective we take. It's fresh water, it's rare earth minerals, it's key deposits of ores like copper. It's the pollution that builds up in the atmosphere and in the oceans. And all those lead to limits in our ability to continually expand the enterprise, the way of life we're accustomed to.
Well, that's really interesting. When you think about that arc, how has the current pandemic changed that? You know, suddenly oil uh, flooded the market, became very inexpensive. And I recognize you're talking about a broader use of the planet beyond just oil. But how does the pandemic fit into this whole picture? And what do you think the future is going to look like? How do you think it might be changed because of the pandemic?
Yeah, what I think of the pandemic was sort of an external, shock, unexpected shock to the system that sort of revealed the fault lines that were already there. So an analogy might be you've got a vase and that has cracks and weaknesses in it, and you knock it and it's going to break where it's weak already. And so I think all the pandemic really revealed was where the system was already weak. And that's what happens when you have really mature systems that evolve to a state of high complexity that are rigid and unable to adapt and really change in any kind of logical, sensible way. They get locked into their ways of doing things. And you see this in terms of large corporations, you see this in terms of like public policy. What makes sense is almost impossible to do because the system has evolved to interlock laws and interest group, you know, people protecting their interests, and it gets kind of out of hand where it really takes a crisis to allow change to really happen. And so what I think the pandemic did was it just basically was a crisis. Now there was going to be another crisis at some point that would have done something similar. There could have been a series of natural disasters. There could have been a war. There could have been the debt overload could have been untenable, and there could have been a repeat of 2008, but at a larger scale. And so there are many ways these things can now kind of, this rigid, large system can kind of wobble and crack. And the pandemic was just the way it ended up happening.
So it seems like oil is going to be coming back to oil, but less expensive now for a while. And I'm no expert, but it seems like that would hinder the renewable energy market. And why would people care to go solar, for example, if it's less expensive to heat their house with oil now? And so, what do you think about that transition to a renewable energy economy in the United States or even globally, and how the pandemic might affect that?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic is, in anytime you see an economic decline, investments in new things like renewable energy are sometimes difficult if they're expensive, if they're high tech. So I think that's going to be tough. I know for a fact that a lot of projects related to wind turbines and photovoltaics, those things are being canceled, they're being pushed off, and for a number of reasons. Supply chains, project management just can't happen, and logistics nowadays. But also then, like you said, these projects become less financially tenable when the price of fossil fuels that they're competing with has plummeted. And if we do stay in a recessionary or even an economic depression state for very long, then the damage to the economy continues, and it gets very hard for the financial system to back anything like this. So it leads to kind of a pulling back of investment. But what's interesting though is that I think people have put way too much stock in the ability of renewable energy systems to really substitute for the energy services we're accustomed to with fossil fuels. And so there is so much more smart investments that can be done that have very little to do with technology, very little to do with high finance.
Like what?
And well, for example, you could ride your bike more, you could walk more, you could redesign your cities and towns to be less car dependent by reducing the amount of parking spaces, making things more attractive for pedestrians and bicyclists. You can do this stuff. You can telecommute more.
Mhm.
We can cut energy use much faster, and we've already seen that. We cut energy use by so much so quickly, and it had nothing to do with replacing it with anything else like a wind turbine or photovoltaics. The cheapest thing and the most likely thing to work is actually changing lifestyles and behaviors. And
Right.
so I
We all
think,
just instantly went to using almost no energy, right? Like we use the energy in our home. My car sat in my driveway for like 6 weeks with a full tank of gas. I
right,
usually refill twice a week.
right, yeah,
I just,
tremendous change happens so quickly.
right.
And so that's what we talk about at Post Carbon Institute a lot, is that renewable energy systems are on the margin in the future. If we have some of this stuff around, yeah, it's going to be useful. There's having electricity as a motive force is kind of nice. But honestly, to think they're going to scale, and that this sort of the modernity we think about, the cosmopolitan era of jet travel and high consumptive lifestyles and the Internet of Things, that doesn't work with the renewable energy technologies we have or are likely to be able to have any kind of scale. And so it's really about focusing on how are we all going to live very differently. And that's really tough to have prior to some kind of major crisis like we're having now.
Where it's forced upon you, it's forced upon people. And everyone had to live more simply or is currently living more simply. We talked about it sometimes in the past tense. I think we're still really in the
Yeah.
middle or beginning of all, who knows?
Yeah.
But I do think as people do try to go back to some sense of normal, there's a lot of people are having a pause and saying, well, I kind of liked slowing down. I might not want to schedule myself the way I used to. And who knows, there might be some permanent, ongoing, positive changes. Jason, I know a lot of local organizations have had a hard time with fundraising and keeping staff on. As I understand, you guys have, a couple of handful of staff on the organization staff. So how are you guys doing with fundraising, and how does that look now? Are people keeping their jobs?
Yeah, we're in really good shape. We are a kind of a unique small think tank that has a message that's really different than other organizations, and so we have sort of I think a lot of dedicated funders. And really, I think this is a kind of period where people are trying to understand what's really going on. They're questioning everything right now. And we have a president who's taught us all about gaslighting and what that's about, where are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? And I think that the American culture, though, in general, has been gaslighting everybody. We've been taught to expect a certain outcomes in the world, and when things aren't going the way they're supposed to, we don't understand it. So one of the things a lot of people that follow Post Carbon Institute find so rewarding is that by integrating an understanding of energy and ecology and economy and society, we're able to piece things together so people understand the historical trajectory, how we got to where we are, and then have a really way of understanding how the future might unfold and what their place could be in it. So really, this could be a time where our organization actually thrives because we're able to make sense of the world for people and hopefully help us create a future that's better.
I want to thank you for joining us today, everyone. Again, this has been Jason Bradford, the president of Post Carbon Institute and co-host of Crazy Town Podcast. I'm Severin Williams at Benton County COVID Connection. I also want to encourage everyone to go to postcarbon.org and make sure that you learn a little bit about the work of the Post Carbon Institute. And Jason, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Seb. Good seeing you.